Hey, before we start the story, please subscribe to the channel to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Leave a like and comment below where you're listening from, too. Now take a deep breath and watch until the end if you dare.
The PACU, or Post-Anesthesia Care Unit, is a world of fleeting consciousness. It's where patients emerge from the deep fog of anesthesia, groggy and disoriented, clinging to the remnants of dreams and pain. I had worked there for 3 years, and I thought I had seen it all. The trembling, the confusion, the panic. But nothing could have prepared me for him. It was a rainy Tuesday evening. The fluorescent lights in the hospital hallway buzzed faintly, their cold glow reflecting off the wet floor. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and something else I couldn't name. My shift had started like any other, checking monitors, preparing IV medications, ensuring patients awoke safely. Everything was routine. Too routine, perhaps. Then Mr. D was wheeled in. Emergency appendectomy, mid-40s, slightly overweight, tired-looking and pale. On paper, nothing unusual. In reality, everything was unusual. The anesthesiologist handed him over with a calm, almost dismissive reassurance. But my gut twisted in that familiar warning only nurses know. This isn't right. I adjusted his bed, checked his vitals. Pulse steady, oxygen good, blood pressure normal. He looked at me with wide, glassy eyes, attempting to speak but unable to form coherent words. At first, I attributed it to residual anesthesia. That's what you do, you rationalize. But then his hands began twitching violently, fingers flailing as if he were fighting invisible restraints. A low, almost imperceptible groan escaped him. "Sarah, help me," I whispered. My colleague, a seasoned PACU nurse with nerves of steel, appeared instantly. Together, we tried to calm him, gently adjusting his position, giving verbal reassurance, but nothing worked. "Something's wrong," Sarah muttered under her breath, her eyes scanning the monitors. Her voice trembled slightly, something I rarely heard from her. I leaned closer to Mr. D, trying to soothe him. "You're safe here. Everything's okay," I said, though my own voice betrayed a quiver. But he wasn't listening. His gaze darted toward the corner of the room, eyes wide, unblinking. "He's there," he whispered hoarsely. "He's watching me." Time slowed. The words lingered in the sterile air, heavier than the beeping of the monitors. My stomach churned. Every nurse has moments of intuition, gut feelings that scream when something is wrong. This was one of them. Something about Mr. D wasn't merely medical. It was something else. Within minutes, his vitals began fluctuating. Oxygen levels dipped, heart rate spiked. The anesthesiologist arrived calm and professional, but his frown betrayed unease. Sedatives were administered, oxygen adjusted, yet the thrashing continued. Every intervention seemed to aggravate him further, and yet, the most terrifying part was his awareness. He knew something was there even if the rest of us could not. Hours stretched like days. Monitors beeped incessantly. Nurses came and went, whispering, casting glances toward Mr. D's bed. Shadows in the corners of the room seemed darker, thicker, almost alive. Every time I looked away, he would scream again, pointing frantically at empty spaces. I had cared for hundreds of patients in PACU. I had handled delirium, post-op seizures, and panic attacks. But nothing had prepared me for this. Nothing explained the sheer terror in his eyes, the intensity of his whispers, the way his body seemed to convulse not with pain, but with something unseen. By the time night fully settled over the hospital, I realized something terrifying. I was not just a nurse watching a patient in crisis. I was witnessing a nightmare unfold in real time. A nightmare that no medication, no protocol, no training could control. And that was the night my worst case as a PU nurse began, a case that would haunt me for the rest of my life. The night deepened, and the PACU transformed from a place of routine recovery into something unrecognizable. Normally, patients drifted in and out of consciousness, groggy and vulnerable, their vital signs slowly stabilizing. Tonight, Mr. D shattered every expectation. After the first hour, his thrashing became more violent. I tried to hold his arm to prevent him from pulling out his IV lines, but it was like trying to hold back a storm. His eyes, wide, glassy, almost feral, kept darting toward the corners of the room. "He's here," he whispered again, louder this time. "He's behind you." Sarah and I exchanged a glance, our hands trembling, even as we maintained protocol. Every nurse learns to mask fear, to keep the chaos contained, but there's always a moment when your instincts scream louder than your training. This was that moment. The monitors began to fluctuate wildly. His oxygen saturation dropped to 85%, then spiked to 99%. His pulse jumped erratically, sometimes racing above 150, sometimes dipping dangerously low. Blood pressure oscillated as though his body were being tugged by unseen hands. The anesthesiologist arrived again, his expression tight. "We've never seen a post-op reaction like this," he muttered. "Give him another bolus." Watch for cardiac signs. I prepared the medications, my hands shaking. Administering sedatives felt futile. Every time the drug took effect, he would suddenly lunge, screaming incoherently, pointing at nothing. The sound of his voice bouncing off the sterile walls was unbearable. Desperate, raw, and human. Is anyone seeing this? Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. He's not just delirious. I see it, I admitted, feeling a chill crawl up my spine. I don't know what it is, but this isn't normal. As the minutes stretched, a sense of dread settled over the PACU. Other patients and nurses cast nervous glances. Some of the newer staff, who hadn't yet faced true chaos, looked ready to flee. Shadows seemed heavier near Mr. D's bed, and the flickering fluorescent lights didn't help. Every hum of the monitors, every beeping alarm, amplified the tension. Mr. D's murmurs grew coherent in their horror. He's watching me, don't let him take me. He's in the walls. His hands clawed at the bed rails as if trying to push something away. Sarah and I reinforced the restraints, but it was like trying to contain pure panic. The night stretched on, and the situation escalated. His body convulsed, thrashing violently even as I tried to keep him calm. Every time I looked into his eyes, I felt a terrifying weight, a pull as though his fear were seeping into me. I had cared for delirious patients before, but this was different. This was raw, intelligent terror focused on things we could not see. At one point, he screamed directly at the corner of the room. "He's here! Stop him! Don't let him!" My stomach sank. I followed his gaze. Nothing. The corner was empty, but the hairs on my arms stood on end. Something was wrong, though I couldn't articulate why. The anesthesiologist called psychiatry, yet even they were baffled. No history of mental illness, they said. Could be a post-op psychotic reaction, extremely rare. But I knew instinctively that something more than medicine was at play. Hours felt like days. The room was thick with tension, the air heavy. I barely moved, barely breathed, afraid that even a small sound could trigger another surge of panic. Every beep of the monitor, every whisper, every shadow flickering across the wall tightened the invisible noose of fear. When the night finally gave way to early dawn, Mr. D was physically exhausted, but his eyes still held that haunted terror. He wasn't asleep. He wasn't calm. He was changed. Even as I documented vitals and prepared him for transfer to a regular floor, I felt a creeping unease settle in my chest. This wasn't just a bad case. This was a nightmare. And as the PACU slowly returned to normal for the day shift, I realized something chilling this night. This case would haunt me long after Mr. D left the hospital. By the time the night was at its darkest, the PACU had transformed into a battlefield. Nurses moved with silent urgency, doctors barked orders, and the steady hum of monitors became a frantic symphony of alarms. Mr. D's body continued to convulse, his eyes darting wildly at empty corners, his whispers growing louder, more insistent, as if trying to warn us of something beyond our understanding. "Prepare for intubation," the anesthesiologist said, his voice tight. "His oxygen is dropping too fast, and sedation isn't working." I assisted, hands shaking despite years of experience. The sedatives hadn't calmed him. If anything, they seemed to intensify his panic. I could see every muscle in his body tense, every vein in his neck standing out as he tried to fight against the restraints, the medications, and the air itself. Then he screamed, piercing and guttural, a sound that reverberated through the unit like glass shattering. "He's in the walls! He's coming for me!" A chill ran down my spine. I had heard delirium in PACU before, but never like this. Never with such coherence and terror. Something about the specificity of his fear was wrong. Nurses exchanged glances, our professional composure slipping under the weight of unease. The anesthesiologist instructed me to check his vitals again. Blood pressure 200/120, heart rate 160 and climbing. Oxygen 78%. My hands moved mechanically, documenting numbers that didn't make sense. These were catastrophic levels, yet he was still conscious, still screaming, still aware. "Call the rapid response team," Sarah shouted. Within seconds, more staff flooded in. Monitors beeped frantically, alarms echoing through the otherwise quiet hospital night. Everyone moved efficiently, yet even seasoned nurses whispered behind their hands, exchanging looks that said this is beyond medical explanation. A fleeting thought crossed my mind. What if he's seeing something we can't? The thought was irrational, unscientific. But when I looked at him, wide-eyed and trembling, pointing at invisible corners, I couldn't dismiss it. The rapid response team administered additional sedatives and oxygen, trying to stabilize him. Nothing worked. His body continued its violent movements, his voice breaking into whispers and then screams again. "He's right behind you! Don't look at him!" I glanced at the corner he was pointing at. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Yet my stomach tightened. The fluorescent lights flickered briefly, throwing strange shadows across the walls. Every instinct in my body screamed that this room had changed, that the boundaries of reality were bending around us. Hours blurred into an endless cycle of intervention and failure. The anesthesiologist consulted neurology and psychiatry remotely, but even their expertise couldn't explain the case. Could be a rare form of post-op delirium, neurology suggested, but the word sounded hollow. Delirium didn't speak. Delirium didn't see things that weren't there with such terror and awareness. At one point, he began whispering names I didn't recognize, calling them out like prayers or warnings. Jason, he's coming, don't let him touch me. My pen hovered over the chart as I wrote down every word, every sound, every convulsion. This was more than a patient in crisis. This was a living nightmare, bleeding into the sterile walls of the PACU. Sarah finally whispered to me, voice trembling, "Do you feel it too?" I froze. Feel what? I asked, my voice tight, my pulse hammering. That presence. Like we're not alone, she said, eyes darting to the shadowed corner near the supply closet. I wanted to dismiss it as exhaustion, as the stress of the night. But even in the bright glare of the fluorescent lights, I felt it. The heaviness in the air, the oppressive weight that seemed to press down on my chest. I had cared for countless patients in emergencies, but I had never felt the room itself alive. By the time dawn began to creep into the sky, Mr. D's body had begun to weaken from sheer exhaustion. Sedatives had partially calmed him, and oxygen levels were slowly stabilizing, but the terror in his eyes remained. He kept staring at the same empty corner, whispering to something only he could see. I stepped out briefly, hands on my face, trying to breathe. Sarah followed, and we sat silently in the break room, sharing the unspoken truth this night had changed us. Something beyond medicine had entered our world, and we had been powerless to stop it. Even as day shift nurses took over, we knew the story wasn't over. Mr. D would eventually recover physically, but the psychological imprint, the horror, would remain. And for those of us in the PACU that night, the boundary between reality and nightmare had been irrevocably blurred. The PACU had become a chamber of shadows. By the time the night reached its peak, the fluorescent lights flickered erratically, throwing strange, elongated shapes across the walls. Every beep of the monitor sounded sharper, more urgent. The hum of machines, once background noise, now seemed almost alive, resonating with the tension in the room. Mr. lay on the bed, partially sedated but still trembling, eyes darting from one corner to another. He whispered constantly, a stream of disjointed names and warnings, his voice trembling as if speaking to entities only he could perceive. "He's behind the curtain, don't let him take me." We tried to reason with him, tried to ground him in reality, but the words felt hollow. Sarah and I exchanged glances, our professional composure fraying. Something had invaded this night, something we couldn't see or explain, yet its presence pressed down on us like a tangible weight. As the hours dragged on, subtle events began to occur that defied logic. Monitors would flash inexplicably, alarms would trigger with no cause, and shadowed corners of the room seemed to shift when we weren't looking. Once, I could have sworn I saw a fleeting figure behind the curtain, standing still, watching. I blinked, and it was gone. Mr. D's whispers became louder, almost panicked. "Stop him! Don't let him! He's here! He's watching!" His eyes rolled back for a moment, and I instinctively grabbed his hand. He tightened his grip, as if seeking an anchor in a reality we could not share. The nurses' lounge became a place of hushed conversations. "Did you see that?" One of the night nurses whispered, pointing toward the corner. A shadow had shifted, though nothing should have been there. No one spoke it aloud, but we all felt the creeping sense of unease. The PACU, a place of recovery and healing, had transformed into something else entirely, a nexus of fear. At one point, Mr. D suddenly bolted upright, screaming, "He's in the walls! Don't look at him." Monitors flared red with erratic vitals. I froze, my pulse racing, my hands hovering helplessly above the controls. I looked at the corner again. Nothing. Yet. The sense of being watched, of unseen eyes tracking our every movement, was undeniable. Hours became a blur. The medical team did everything by the book. Sedatives, oxygen, vitals checks, but nothing quelled the terror in Mr. D's eyes. I had cared for countless patients in delirium or panic, but this was different. This was intelligent fear, precise, aware, and aimed directly at us. By 4 a.m., exhaustion had turned to dread. Sarah leaned against the wall, whispering, I can't stop feeling like he's right behind me, even when I turn around." I nodded silently, feeling the same oppressive weight. The room felt alive, as if it were breathing, watching, and aware of our own fear. Then came the quiet moments, the kind that make your skin crawl. The thrashing slowed, the screaming diminished, but the whispers persisted, soft and insistent. Mr. D's eyes were wide, unblinking, following invisible movements across the room. It was a silent terror, more terrifying than any loud scream. As dawn broke, the anesthesiologist finally declared him stable enough to transfer to the regular floor. Physically, he was recovering. Mentally, I don't know. His terror hadn't vanished. I watched him leave the PACU, walking slowly, still staring at shadows we couldn't see. And as the room emptied, a heavy silence settled over us. The monitors no longer beeped erratically, the shadows seemed still. But the memory remained. Every corner, every flicker of light, every whisper from that night had left a mark. We had witnessed something beyond medicine, beyond reason. I returned home, physically drained, mentally shaken. Sleep was impossible. Every shadow in my apartment seemed alive. Every flicker of light felt like a warning. And even weeks later, when I returned to the PACU, that night haunted every step. The room itself seemed to remember, waiting to remind me that some cases don't end when the patient recovers. Some cases linger long after the monitors go silent, long after the sun rises. Days passed, but the PACU never felt the same. The machines hummed their usual tunes, monitors beeped rhythmically, and the lights glared bright and sterile. But underneath it all, the memory of that night lingered like a shadow over every corner. Mr. D eventually stabilized and was transferred to a regular floor. Physically, he was fine. His vitals normalized, his tremors ceased, and his panic attacks disappeared. He walked, spoke, and ate like any recovering patient. But when I asked him about his experience, he avoided eye contact and muttered vague phrases. I don't remember much. Just fear. A shadow. Even the doctors and psychiatrists involved struggled to rationalize what had happened. They chalked it up to an extreme case of post-operative delirium, exacerbated by a rare combination of anesthesia reactions. They cited literature and case studies, numbers and percentages, and tried to reassure us that it was just a medical anomaly. But anyone who had been in that room knew it was more than medicine. Among the staff, whispers circulated. Some claimed they had seen shadows move unnaturally. Others swore that the monitors flickered in time with Mr. D's whispered words. Even the most skeptical nurses admitted to feeling uneasy, like unseen eyes were watching, waiting. The night shift joked nervously, but the joke never fully landed. The fear was real, lingering like a heavy fog. For me, it was personal. I returned to work, tried to resume my routine, but every patient I wheeled into the PACU reminded me of that night. Every shadow in the corner, every flicker of light made my chest tighten. I replayed the events over and over in my mind, the way Mr. D screamed, the way he pointed, the way the room seemed alive with something we couldn't see. I began keeping a journal, documenting every detail, the exact times, the phrases he whispered, the patterns in his vitals, the subtle changes in the room. I thought if I could capture it, if I could write it down, maybe I could understand it. But some things aren't meant to be understood, only survived. Colleagues checked on me, asking if I was okay, noticing the shadows under my eyes, the tension in my hands. I smiled, nodded, reassured them. But the truth was, part of me hadn't left that room. The fear, the helplessness, the terror in his eyes, they had embedded themselves into my memory, impossible to erase. Weeks later, I ran into Mr. D briefly in the hallway. He looked at me, recognition flickering in his eyes, and whispered softly, "Thank you for staying." Then he was gone. I couldn't tell if he was thanking me for saving his life or for witnessing what he couldn't explain. Some nights I lie awake thinking about him, thinking about the things he saw that we didn't. I imagine that shadowed corner, the whispers, the invisible presence, and I wonder, do some patients carry something with them from the operating room? Something that lingers, that leaves traces in the people who care for them? I don't know. I only know this: some cases in PACU aren't just medical emergencies. Some are nightmares, alive and breathing, waiting in the corners, leaving scars that no sedative or protocol can erase. And Mr. D, he is the one I will never forget. Even months after that night, the PACU never felt the same. Every time I walked through the sliding doors, the sterile smell, the hum of machines, the faint flicker of fluorescent lights, they all carried weight, a reminder that some nights leave marks that don't fade. I tried to rationalize it as we nurses are trained to do. It was delirium, rare but documented. Anesthesia reactions, medical anomalies. But logic didn't soothe the memory of Mr. D's wide, unblinking eyes, the whispered names, the way he seemed to see things no one else could. Logic couldn't erase the shadows in the corners that seemed to linger long after he left. Other nurses asked if I'd moved on, if I was over it. I smiled, nodded, and lied. Because the truth is, I never left that night. Every patient who awakens under my care carries a fraction of that memory into my mind. Every beep of a monitor echoes the panic in his voice. Every shadowed corner whispers warnings I cannot dismiss. Some nights I return home and feel the weight of it, the same way I did in the PACU. I catch myself glancing toward empty corners, expecting movement, expecting whispers. Sleep comes reluctantly, uneasy and shallow, and in the quiet hours, when the hospital is dark and distant, I hear it, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper, "Is watching." I know it's impossible. I know it's just memory, trauma, the mind playing tricks. But the memory doesn't obey logic. It doesn't fade. It lingers like a specter in the room, like Mr. D's terror etched into the very walls of the PCU. Some cases end when the patient stabilizes, when the monitors show normal vitals and the anesthesia wears off. Some cases end with smiles and thank yous. This one did not. This case stays with you. It grows in the quiet moments, in the shadows you thought were empty, in the flicker of lights and the hum of machines. I still remember his face, still remember the whispering, still remember the fear that wasn't just his. It became mine too. And I know deep down that some part of that night will never leave me. Because some patients, some nights don't just recover. Some haunt you forever.